We are interviewing Teller, the silent half of Penn and Teller.
Fuck you, silent. What the fuck are you talking about?
Silent. Fuck you. First words out of his mouth. I don't think we're going to deal with any of the why you're silent or how we got together, any of that stuff.
You know that, don't you?
I know all of that. Let's talk about Shakespeare.
Oh, good.
Let's start with Shakespeare. Talk about your the production of Macbeth that you did, and then we'll go to the production of Tempest.
Oh, Macbeth. Well,
Yeah.
Macbeth is a supernatural horror thriller that was written in the 1500s, and it's full of ghosts and supernatural visions and hallucinations and stuff. And I thought that would be a good show to fill up with some magic, because a lot of it has to do with people going crazy and seeing things that aren't really there. And magic is all about making people see things that are not there. And that's what we did. We shared that position with the audience. So instead of just looking at somebody standing on stage, gazing off into the air, waving his hand and saying, "Is this a dagger which I see before me?" The audience got to see what Macbeth was seeing. So we took him inside the characters.
But you said that it was ghosts and apparitions and hallucinations. Do you believe in the story of Macbeth that some of those ghosts are supposed to be in the world?
Shakespeare's really good at straddling the fence on that. He gives you the impression. I mean, for example, the ghost of Banquo. Macbeth murders a guy. He murders his very good friend Banquo because there's been a prediction that Banquo will someday take over, and Macbeth gets really scared on that because he's quite a paranoid guy. And when Banquo appears on stage, there really is a question. Is Macbeth just seeing this in his own mind, or is the ghost of Banquo really coming back? And Shakespeare really doesn't ever deal with that.
Yeah, when I read it, which you're an expert on this, and I read it once. I read it, and I think this is probably from my point of view more than the text.
Yeah.
Thought that everything in it was hallucination. But do you think that Shakespeare's purposely straddling the fence on that?
I think one of the reasons that he stands up to contemporary viewings is because you don't necessarily have to interpret all the supernatural stuff as really occurring. So you can go both ways. He's pretty careful about it. I mean, in Hamlet, he's very, very careful about not saying where Hamlet's father's spirit is residing, whether he's in hell or whether he's just in Hamlet's mind, or whether he's just one of those sort of wandering non-Christian ghosts, from that you see from ancient times. He's very careful. He's weirdly careful to deal with the supernatural in an ambiguous way that can be psychological. I think that is what he's doing. So when you usually see the show, you usually see some parts interpreted as hallucinations. You see Lady Macbeth rubbing her hands as though she's got blood on them, but you don't see the blood.
Right.
On the other hand, in the Banquo ghost scene, you actually do see Banquo, and that's and that's the way it's in the play. It's specified that Banquo comes on stage as a ghost and scares Macbeth, but to the audience, I think you're left to go one way or the other.
And when you put special effects in there, when you put magic tricks in there, have you moved it away from hallucination and from psychological, or you just feel like the audience is... I understand that in a movie, that you could change the point of view, but in the theater, did you feel that people watching the show were switching their point of view to inside Macbeth's mind, or did you feel they were seeing something from the outside? How does that... Because in movies, we know the convention for doing that.
Yeah. I think they were doing both. I think they were taking their choice. From my point of view, what I was trying to do was to take them completely inside Macbeth's experience. I was really trying to show the experience from his point of view.
The entire play?
Yeah.
So you never change points of view? The entire play is from inside Macbeth's?
There are scenes in which Macbeth does not appear, and in those scenes you're not from his point of view. But the story essentially is being told, I see the story as being told from his point of view.
But the scenes that he's not in are not things he could know?
Not really, because sometimes it's like people attacking his castle, and he doesn't know about that.
Sure. Now, why don't you detail the magic tricks you put into that for people who didn't see it?
Well, the very first idea that I got on it that I really liked was there's a lot of talk about people faking their expressions for other people. That is, they're putting on a false face, greeting people whom they're about to murder cheerfully. So I thought it would be cool to have a mirror on stage so that every time they're putting on their false face, they could look into that mirror. That also set up the presence of a mirror in Mr. and Mrs. Macbeth's bedroom. And so the very first image that I had was of Macbeth having put on his false face for other occasions, kind of leaning against that mirror, and then suddenly seeing the reflection of a dagger floating in that mirror. And what's neat to me about that is that the reflection, from the audience's point of view, the reflection was there, but the substance wasn't. But when Macbeth himself lifted his hand as if to grasp the reflection, you saw his hand grasping empty air in the theater, but you saw the reflection of his hand grasping the dagger. And it's really interesting, because then what you see is that image of a translucent object that your hand is reaching through and trying to grab hold of. And we had it puppeteered in such a way. It was of course a Pepper's Ghost kind of illusion. So that means that what's going on is really happening behind the surface of the mirror, and the mirror is not. The mirror is like the kind of mirror you have in interrogation rooms. It's a sort of a one-way mirror that if you if the detectives in the interrogation room had a really bright spotlight on them, and the lights in the interrogation room went down, you'd see this ghostly image of detectives listening in to the interrogation room. Well, we put the mirror, the dagger, in that same sort of position, just behind the mirror with an extremely bright light on it, so you could see both what was going on stage and this ghostly image behind it.
You should explain how Pepper's Ghost works in the Haunted Mansion. The Haunted Mansion.
Sure. One of the Pepper's Ghost is Pepper's Ghost proper is a slightly different effect, but I'll trace it back. In the old days, if you're in a house late at night, and there's no lights on in your room, and you walk to the window holding a candle, you'll see your own reflection combined with whatever you can see on the street outside you. Let's say the street light is shining down on your lawn. You'll see a combination in which your reflection, translucent, seems to be in that scene of the lawn outside the window. An English guy, an English scientist whose name escapes me right now, begins with a P, but it wasn't Pepper. An English scientist came up with a way of doing that in the theater, and what he did was it's a crazy sort of idea. But imagine an audience seated in an arena-style seating, where the seats go up, and they're looking down at the stage. And when they look down at the stage, they see between them and the stage is a sheet of glass. They can look through the sheet of glass and see what's really going on the stage, but if you put underneath the audience, in a little nook underneath the audience, brightly illuminated people dressed as ghosts, those people are reflected on the sheet of glass that the audience is looking through, and they seem to be in the scene on stage. That illusion was made famous by John Henry Pepper, who worked he was a teacher at the London Polytechnic that had a little theater. He built a little theater there where this whole thing was set up so that people could act out stupid little plays. I mean, really stupid, content-free little plays.
To show off the ghost.
That showed off the effect.
You have to build the theater for this.
You have to build a theater for this. The greatest place to see this nowadays is at Knott's Berry Farm. What's it called? Like the Haunted Wigwam, or it's
the Knott's? And I don't know that.
Yeah,
Henry Dirks is the guy who invented it.
Dirks, that's it. Yeah, that begins with a P, as I said.
Yeah.
But that's really great there. And in the Disney Haunted Mansion, there's a place where your little ghost car is riding along, and you look down into a great big ballroom. And in the ballroom, you see transparent ghosts, waltzing around tables. And what you're looking at is you're looking through a sheet of glass to see the furniture of the room, but reflected on that sheet of glass is a scene that's happening underneath you, which is ghosts on little turntables being spun. It's also beautifully done in Finding Nemo in Florida, in the Disney in Florida.
Yeah, they have it in California as well.
Yeah, where you're actually looking into a real aquarium,
yeah.
And in there you see an animated fish that's actually just being reflected off the glass of the fish tank.
And also, now this is often called in modern days a hologram. It's not that. It's misrepresented. It's hyped that way when it really isn't.
Yep.
And I believe, do you know exactly how the Tupac Shakur live performance was done?
No, I don't.
In that show?
No.
Because I think that was also that same thing. They said not a hologram, but something kind of like a hologram. The people that were hyping it referred to it differently.
Nowadays because we have really good video screens, we don't have to have dummies illuminated to play our ghosts. We can have video screens with really amazing effects on them that can apparently be placed into a scene by being reflected at the appropriate distance from the piece of glass that you're looking through.
I believe that's what they did for the Tupac Shakur
and for Finding Nemo.
Yeah. Well, Finding Tupac Shakur was less popular. Okay, so you had the dagger.
So the dagger, and we had the dagger puppeteered by a person hiding behind the mirror in black, and the dagger had a hollow handle, and it was filled with blood. So at one moment the dagger sort of pivots, and suddenly blood runs down the dagger, and it was quite creepy and very beautiful.
It was.
And that's right, you saw it. You came out and saw it. Mm-hmm. I was impressed that you were willing to make that.
I want to see it
for a piece of Shakespeare. And afterwards you said it isn't really magic that you're doing there; it's sort of special effects.
Well, that's what I was going to get into. After you went through this, I was going to talk about how after thinking about this quite a bit, I think to me it's a special effect if you have to add it to a pre-existing script. Because with a magic trick, you're using the script, the design of it, to actually help with the effect. And with special effects, you can't do that.
I don't understand what you just said.
When we do a magic trick in the
I'm familiar with that.
Okay, the Penn and Teller show. In order to get the effect, like the cell phone into the fish, our whole trick is designed to accomplish that. So the whole thing is designed for that. The characters are designed for that. Mm-hmm. The speechifying is designed for that. Mm-hmm. The plot is designed for that. Mm-hmm. It's designed to all go to that one final thing. When you do a play and you add magic tricks in, you take away all the power of that. If the person writing it was not aware there was going to be an effect there, you take away the plotting, the character, and all of that stuff that revolves around the trick. You've moved the trick from the center of attention to over to the side of attention.
You're saying it's frosting rather than the cupcake.
Well, no, I'm not saying that at all. No. What I'm saying is it's harder because you don't get to use everything.
Except to do this, when I tell you about how I motivated the mirror into the scene, that's me essentially writing magic trick stuff to allow that to fit into place.
Yeah.
So I am, I'm doing a magic trick, but I'm doing a magic trick to order, so to speak. Yeah. Other things we did, and sort of more direct. When Mrs. Macbeth, and Mrs. Macbeth is kind of she's a very loyal wife who wants nothing more than the well-being of her husband, and naturally this involves murdering somebody. And once the murder's done, all of a sudden she gets these really violent pangs of guilt, starts sleepwalking, talking in her sleep and stuff. And normally what you have is an actress who's walking around with her eyes half closed, rubbing her hands and saying, all the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand, out, damn spot. And she rubs her hands. And what we thought would be good would be to do that as a magic trick in which you would incrementally share her point of view. So she first looks at her hand and says, here's a spot still, and there's nothing there. And then she takes that non-existent spot and wipes it on her dress, and now there's a big blood stain. And as the speech continues, the blood becomes more and more and more intense and constant, eventually gushing out over her hands, and then at one moment she hears a bell ringing, turns her back, and when she turns back towards the audience, she's now just drenched with blood like Carrie. And I thought this was a really important thing to do because you don't see much of Lady Macbeth.
Macbeth himself is not on stage.
No.
So this is all her point of view.
She's all alone. So, I say it's from the point of view of Mr. and Mrs. Macbeth, who really function as a team.
Okay.
The next thing you hear, she's dead. And normally that's a little hard to get in the play. It's a little hard to understand how intense her feelings of guilt were that would end up with her committing suicide is the implication. It's never said the Queen has committed suicide, but the Queen, my lord, is dead. With no murderer involved, it seems like that's probably the source of it.
Or she was freaked out to death. Also, you could say, I guess, right?
I guess in this particular thing, we wanted it to look like she really had no alternative. We wanted the audience to feel that she had gone so far off the deep end, and her world was so full of blood, she might as well kill herself. Then there are also, in the play, there's Shakespeare instructs us, witches vanish. We found it a little difficult to make all three of our witches vanish, particularly since one of them was an enormous African-American football player. So we didn't try to vanish him. But the other two, who were also played by...
Now, in other productions, how is that done?
They run away. Generally speaking, they slip into the shadows, and we depend on the actors to go, oh, where did they go?
Oh, I see.
And we did a little bit of that. That is to say, we only vanished one of them. We let two of them slip away into the shadows because we just really couldn't. That was too much poundage to disappear. But the slimmer one, we had wearing a cloaked whore's outfit. And her cloak is up, and one of the two people who are on stage with him, Macbeth and Banquo, is wrestling with her, and her back goes momentarily to the audience, and we snuck her out by a very sneaky means, and then suddenly the cape collapsed and she was gone, which is a trick that was actually invented in, I think, the 1940s
for the Dracula?
by Guy Jarrett for the play Dracula, for Dracula's big disappearance. There they did it, with lots of a good high budget. They had an elevator trap so they could sneak Dracula out on an elevator trap. We had no elevator traps.
And is this mascot moth? Is that the?
A mascot moth is a different trick altogether.
Okay.
Mascot moth is a costume frame trick. The mascot moth was a trick that David Devant did, in which a woman came on stage dressed as a person around 1900 would imagine a moth to be dressed.
They had never seen moths in the 1900s. I don't know if you knew that.
No, and if you've ever seen pictures of them, it looks pretty tatty to me. And she's got sort of gauzy moth wings and a sort of gauzy moth costume, and she folds her wings in front of her face, and then he approaches her with a candle, and suddenly she's gone. And that's another one that was very difficult to do. I mean, horribly difficult to do. So much so that you will never see it really done nowadays.
Okay, because when I was in Lance's show, he did one that he called the mascot moth, but clearly closer to what you're talking about with Dracula.
But let's back up for a second.
Okay.
When you say Lance, you mean Lance Burton, master magician.
Yes.
When you say costume frame trick, you should explain that, or we can't keep going with the conversation.
You expect the listener to keep up with
I
that?
thought this was
I didn't realize people were listening in. I thought it was just you and me talking about old tricks. Well, okay, if you insist. So for the mascot moth trick, this woman was dressed in this cockamamie costume. And the cockamamie costume was made so that it would support itself even if you pulled the person inside out. Okay,
so entirely like a mannequin, a wire mannequin.
Well, yeah, costume frame.
But a very delicate little costume frame, so she would get into her position. She'd be lowered out of that costume on an elevator trap in the stage, leaving the costume sort of self-supporting behind, and then Devant would approach this thing, and on the back of the costume there was essentially a ball of twine. And a tube would come up out of the stage behind her. He would drop the ball of twine in, and the ball of twine was attached to the back of the costume. So now we have just this delicate little framework of a costume on stage with a rope attached to the back of it, going down a tube into the stage. And when Devant approaches, all of a sudden, people from down under the stage, who have all kinds of wheels and gadgets, yank that costume. Woof! And the costume goes shoop into the little tube, and the tube goes whoop down into the stage, just as Devant steps into place. I believe that Doug Henning did a version of that in his show on Broadway that frequently failed. Jim Steinmeier has a great book called Hiding the Elephant.
Yeah.
And in that book he describes some of the travails that they went through with that trick, because it's just, there's so many things to go wrong.
Of course.
One after the other.
And what did Lance do?
Lance did like an artist dream, brought a woman to life
in
a cape with a hood. She danced out to the middle of the stage. He would put his arms around her and kiss her, and then throw the cape down on the floor, and she was gone.
Yeah.
That's more of the...
That's the Dracula Vanish.
That's the Dracula Vanish. Right. That's not the mascot.
The mascot moth is just not really a good trick because there's too much to go wrong.
But did he have it work? It was done originally?
Did the van have it work?
Yeah.
I believe so, but I don't have any way to know, because the only major reportage we have on that is Devant's own memoir. In which case, I'm sure it worked every night. Just like every trick in our show works every night, no problem.
Our tricks pretty much do work every night.
They do. Occasionally, somebody will throw a cell phone out into the lobby instead of to his partner. But yes,
there was a wicked bad throw. There was a moment.
A wicked bad throw.
Many wicked bad throws.
Thank you.
But I'm just saying that the other night at the Almond Growers Association, we were on stage. And there's a moment where we put a cell phone into a Starbucks cup, and then the mistake is never starts in the throw. Mm-hmm. It starts. I'm supposed to knock the cap off into the person, and they're supposed to catch it. And then when they look to catch it, I then throw the phone out of the cup over my head to tell her. But if I pop that cap wrong and the person turns wrong, I just go crazy, and then you can't tell where I'm going to throw the phone, and I threw it right into hell.
Well, there have been nights where in a desperate attempt to catch the phone, I've lurched forward and caught the phone on the very edge of the bucket, whereupon it has rocketed over the head of the spectator directly on the floor in front of him, and then I, looking like like Little Red Riding Hood with my Easter basket, skip by, pick up the phone.
Little Red Riding Hood with her Easter basket?
That's me.
This has turned ugly.
Well, wait, it's only gone out in front of the person twice, right?
That's right.
Only twice has it been as horrendous as Henning's mascot moth.
And we haven't yet hit anybody in the back of the head with it, which I'm looking forward to.
Which we will. So we were up to the Dracula Vanish of one of the witches. What other stuff you had in there?
We had, let me see. Well, we had an opening bit that I was very fond of. That I wouldn't call a magic trick. I would call it a special effect. But every time I have gone to a regional theater show, at the opening moment of the show, when the audience is filled with anticipation and excitement, and the lights dim, and you're just ready to rocket into that story, some 20-something whiny young woman comes out and says, "Welcome to the show tonight. We'd like to thank you for your patronage. Please patronize next season," and does a horrible little speech. So we arranged, and they insisted that would have to happen at the show. So we arranged for the ending of that to be, as she continues to natter on with her promotion of the little theater, a couple of the soldiers from the battle scene that's about to follow begin to lurk on all sides of her very threateningly. And just when she's launching into her full pitch for the show, one of them comes out, cuts her throat, and she drops in the darkness. And that brought me a great deal of satisfaction. I really had to fight for that with everybody at the theater. And I said, that's non-negotiable. I want to kill the person who's spoiling the opening of the show at the top of the show.
But she got all her information out. So what are they bitching about?
She didn't really.
She didn't
really.
How does Macbeth start? What's the first part of Macbeth?
Macbeth traditionally starts with three witches appearing and screaming, "When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain?" And that's sort of to get your attention with a lot of thunder. And then the scene right after that has a soldier who's covered with blood and terribly wounded come on and tell you what happened in a battle. And it's kind of hard to listen to, and it kind of goes on and on and on and on. So we edited that down and acted it out instead. We did the battle scene that was being described in that scene instead. So we began the show with a big bloody battle with people being stabbed and gutted. And there's a great image in that soldier's speech where he says he unseamed him from the nave to the chops, that is, from the belly button to the jaw. And we staged that image as part of the movie as well.
From the nave to the chops.
Unseamed him from the nave to the chops. What a good expression.
So then you came out. If you go right from the slit in the woman's throat at the beginning to the battle scene, it makes a lot of sense to go directly into that. I mean, going to the witches would have been harder.
The witches. I think we had them come out and do their announcement, but then it burst right into battle.
I see. Now you said a few times that Shakespeare is easier to understand and easier to hear the rhythms of if done in a heavy Southern accent. You want to talk about that a little bit?
That's one observation that linguists have made, is that the dialect of Shakespeare's time sounded more like a deep Southern dialect than it does like contemporary British English. Mm-hmm. So it would make sense that doing it in American, you'd actually have a pretty, at least as good a shot at understanding what's going on as if you were an English person.
And have you ever heard a deep Southern reading of it?
Tomorrow and tomorrow. I heard Lance Burton do tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time.
So we've heard it then.
Yes.
We've heard
and
it.
Yes. Well, okay, enough of that.
There's a little bit more Blanche, I think, than
there might be.
Lance.
There's more Blanche in me than there is Lance.
More Blanche than Lance.
Blanche Burton.
Yeah. And also, I mean, the other thing is there's witches in the show, and the witches do a very famous incantation where they stand over a cauldron and drop in all manner of disgusting stuff, and then there are monstrosities that emerge and give prophecies. And we thought we would just do this as literally as possible. I mean, it says in the script, it says an armed head rises out of the cauldron. So we had Frank Ippolito, who's a special effects makeup guy in L.A., build us a severed head that with a movable jaw, with guts like dripping down from underneath, that we operated with a stick that came up from underneath the cauldron, and that whole area was also masked by optical means. And we had my favorite one was we had a hideous little baby that had been used.
Now, when you said armed head, does that mean with armor on it?
Yes. Yeah. And I think this one did have a helmet on it, but it started off bald. And the second thing that appears is a bloody child, it says. And I thought, since at the end of the play we learned that one of the characters was born by a cesarean section, that we should have a brand new born bloody baby. So we had a brand new born bloody baby who was a puppet made out of, I think, a dummy that Frank had gotten from an old Marilyn Manson show. There were a bunch of these dummy babies that were made for a Marilyn Manson show. And
you got a deal on them?
Yeah, and Frank adapted that. And then, of course, we gave it a monster voice. So you had a little baby with a, horrible monster voice. That's my horrible monster voice. Thank you, Finn. At least it doesn't sound like Blanche. And then just to top it off, it's the last apparition is a child crowned with a tree in his hands. So we thought, okay, and we got a kid. And we had a kid with a crown on him with a tree in his hands emerging from the cauldron giving this prophecy. And considering that the cauldron was maybe 1.5 feet tall and appeared to be on a platform that you couldn't see underneath, this kid rising out was pretty creepy.
Platform you could see underneath.
Apparently you could see nothing underneath.
Yeah.
Even though there was a lot of stuff underneath, including one of the most cumbersome elevators that has ever been created. A lot of people worked really hard to make that work.
And other magic tricks in the show?
Some of the not really magic tricks. We had a great fight coordinator who came up. He was looking for a way to have Macbeth break somebody's arm really effectively, and he and I worked on it for a while, and we ended up putting a piece of dowel stick in the guy's sleeve, So the guy could bend his arm, but when he extended his arm, the dowel slid down so that it coincided with his elbow, and Macbeth came over and broke the elbow, and it made this wonderful acoustic breaking sound that I think set people's teeth on edge.
Oh, cool. That is cool. Yeah. That is very cool.
I did Macbeth, and the only special effect was that I had lost my voice.
Oh, that's right. You did. You can tell that story.
My voice is in my sword, thou bloody villain. With laryngitis. I was Macduff. And the big fight scene started with that joke. My voice is in my sword, thou bloody villain. Also in the show was the fellow who later became my juggling partner saying, how do you keep the rosy color of your cheeks when mine are bleached with cheer instead of blanched with fear? So, there's a lot of special effects in the junior high version of Macbeth as well.
Yeah.
Now, to your knowledge, looking into this, was it ever done with magic tricks before?
People have tarted up Shakespeare with almost anything you can think of at various times. I don't think anybody's ever done it to the degree that we did. They've done the witches with more goofy stuff, but the difference between magic and a pure special effect is magic has provers. In a pure special effect, you can just you could put the cauldron on a stage, directly on the stage, and then have things come out of it, and you'd say, okay, they're coming out of the cauldron.
Right.
What magic would do is magic would make sure you can see under the cauldron. Those little provers, those little things that say, well, this isn't being done quite the way you think it is.
Well, you always say the unwilling suspension of disbelief. You should talk about that.
Okay, that's a cleverly phrased question. You should talk about that.
Yeah, sure.
It's a gift he has.
Oh, yeah. Well, magic is the unwilling suspension of disbelief. Samuel Taylor Coleridge is famous for writing in a work about the arts, about the audience having a willing suspension of disbelief for the moment. That's his full phrase. When you're watching a piece of fiction, you don't challenge it. You deliberately, consciously, and willingly suspend your disbelief, your skepticism for the moment. You go along with it. And the peculiar thing about magic is that magic looks like something amazing happening whether or not you decide to suspend your disbelief, whether or not you decide to go along with our make-believe. It looks impossible. It looks like it's happening. It's what Rosie used to call the imitation of an impossible event.
You should say who Rosie was.
Oh, Rosie.
Another good question.
Yeah.
Who was Rosie?
Who was Rosie?
That's good.
We'll work on these.
If you want to be in a question form,
Rosie was my high school mentor. He was my drama coach, a very eccentric man who carried himself like the devil, dressed pretty much like the devil with a goatee before trendy people like you had goatees, and vests before people like us wore vests, and gold watch chains, and smoked black Subrani cigarettes, and wore a red carnation, and had a very deep voice and very careful articulation, very theatrical kind of guy, who taught me whatever I know about acting. I don't know quite what that is, but and who was also a magician, and with whom I spent many, many, many late-night long conversations talking about where magic should fit into theater, because he was teaching me theater, and we were both interested in magic. He had done magic since he was a small kid, and he did magic shows, as you well know, because the night that we opened off Broadway, we had Rosie's one-man magic show as our entertainment.
Yes, we did.
And it was delightful. His execution was far from perfect, but the attitude and the joie de vivre that accompanied it was really incomparable.
Now, how old was Rosie when he died?
In his 50s.
Wow. I see Rosie is so old, and he was dead by the time he was my age, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
which is not saying he wasn't so old. It's just.
But he was old compared to us. Huh. I imagine he was in his mid-30s when I first met him. And I was 16-year-old high school kid, so he was old as the hills.
Yeah, he was.
But he also carried himself with this sort of feeling of ancient wisdom.
He was also decrepit.
Yes,
makes it adds to the feeling of age.
Well, as did the vast consumption of grain alcohol
And cigarettes.
And cigarettes.
Yeah.
Continuous cigarettes.
I mean, even if you start out like Mel Gibson, alcohol and cigarettes will fuck you up.
Yeah, he used to tell me that he drank grain alcohol because of the purity of it.
I know.
He said the reason you got hangovers from alcohol was because of the impurities.
Well, it's the same thing as these American Spirit cigarettes. You know,
Right.
Everybody smokes these American Spirit cigarettes. I mean, I remember on the big Celebrity Apprentice, Stephen Baldwin and Gary Busey, two authorities, talking about how American tobacco companies put all these impurities in cigarettes, which got people so sick and screwed them up.
I mean, like tobacco.
Yeah, then they smoke the American Spirit cigarettes and feel like, I don't know if Gary did, but they feel like they were somehow health cigarettes.
What were they made of?
Tobacco.
Tobacco.
Yeah, nothing but tobacco.
I see.
They don't have the other additives that make
No filters.
that make it addictive or that make you sick, which is the tobacco. Yeah, that was always. I always thought Rosie was one of the pioneers in that drinking grain alcohol.
Rosie was also a pioneer in taking what you have and making it seem enviable. Rosie lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment, and nobody took care of him at all. So he would buy TV dinners. And when you go over, he would invite you to dinner, and then he would take TV dinners out, and he would open them up and say the problem with TV dinners is they're very well organized nutritionally, they're very well balanced, they're put together by fine chefs, but they're insufferably bland. And so he would spice the TV dinner up, put it in the oven, and present it as if it were the finest thing that you would get from a named chef on the Vegas Strip. And it was delicious, and you enjoyed it. And any time I am presented with anything by a named chef on the Vegas Strip, I really ask myself, is that really any better than a Rosie TV dinner?
He also, I remember him saying to me, and this was, although he shaped your whole life, he did shape big hunks of mine.
Yeah.
Because I remember him saying that he lived in an apartment building across the street from the school where he taught.
Yep, Central High School.
And I remember him saying that people would say to him, "You're so lucky to live across the street," and him being just disgusted they would use the word lucky in that way. And that changed my whole way of looking at the word lucky. And once Rosie has said that, there's no luck involved. I picked the apartment building across the street from where I work. And it's remarkable. I mean, like Alanis Morissette using ironic. Yeah. It's remarkable how many people use lucky in that way that bothered Rosie so much.
Yeah, aren't we lucky to live in a town where we can work?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Aren't we lucky to have our own theater? Oh, geez, that just fell into our laps.
It was just random chance that worked out that way. You were talking about Rosie's competence, and that was part of his charm. Part of his charm was when they used the word sketch for Saturday Night Live. But what was great about watching Rosie perform is it really was a sketchbook. You had to fill in the spaces. How great would this be if the trick had worked? How great would this be if you didn't see the vanish? And there's a huge amount of charm in that.
And it's, in many ways, it's true of all magic. There really is, I believe, no magic that comes up to what it is in the magician's mind. And part of the beauty of magic for me is the poignancy of filling in that gap between what the magician thinks he's doing and what you see him doing.
It's great.
And it really is true, even with the very, very best of them. And I'm sure with us too. There's this feeling that it's not quite there, and I love that.
It is also amazing, you talk so often about the unwilling suspension of disbelief, but it's always interesting to me the number of rules that are in place. You don't, when you go to a magic show, you come to our magic show, even though we expect you to be skeptical, you still stay in your seat. You still don't grab things. You still follow. People on stage follow a tremendous number of rules to be in the theater in order to they willingly suspend their skepticism to a point so they can have it unwillingly fool them. They don't go to find out. And you find that out constantly when an experiment I always tries. People are asking me how magic tricks are done. I tell them that there is a magic trick, several magic tricks, that are patented. And you can go to the U.S. Patent Office website. It used to be hard. Now it's easy. You go to the computer, and I'll talk to DJs about this when I do morning radio. You know, let's pretend Teller's here. Let me just ask. Guy just did that the other day. I'll say Teller's in the studio. I'll ask him questions. Just have him say nothing. Okay, that'll be a fun little.
Oh, I like your DJ voice.
It's a little bit of Blanche in it.
Plenty of Blanche.
Yeah. And they do that. And what amazes me is I'll say, you can find out how these tricks are done. Just go. As soon as I'm off the air, go and check it out. Or go to a magic store and find out. Or go find a magic book online and find out. And I'll go back, the next time I have something to sell, or we have something to sell, I'll go back and ask them. They never check it out. So there's this area where they're choosing to be just this amount of skeptical. When we're talking about the difference between the way a magician sees things in their mind and the way it actually happens, I need to ask you about the creation of life.
When I was at college, I was even more pretentious than I am today because I was younger. And I persuaded a drama teacher there to give me to work with me on my magic act and make it and tell the faculty that we were doing a reading course called The Figure of the Magician in Dramatic Literature. But in fact, we were just working on my magic show. But in those days, I didn't quite know about working on a magic show. I knew a lot about thinking about a magic show, much like Rosie. I thought about the ideas and how beautiful the ideas were, and didn't actually deal with the harsh realities of them until very, very late in the game. And so about the most ambitious idea I think one could possibly do is the creation of life. That does seem like something that's normally relegated to very major figures. So I thought it'd be a good trick to take a bunch of rags and wad them up into the shape of a rabbit.
Now you're already working silently now, right?
Yeah, I'm already working silently because I thought it was clever to try to lie without speaking, and so I the idea was to gather these rags together, anoint them with something, which was of course going to be lighter fluid, set it on fire, and then smother it out, and when my hands would part, there would be a live rabbit. And I thought, well, now you don't want to do this with just a conventional, dull, white rabbit. Let's make it seem as though we're combining the colors of the rags. So I shopped around until I found a wild rabbit for sale that had complicated markings on it and were various different colors. And I found rags to match that. I thought, oh boy, this is going to be
Where's there a wild rabbit store?
I really don't remember where I got it, but I mean
Louisiana.
It was not your regular domesticated breed, but a brown kind of nervous rabbit. We'll get to that in a moment. And I had figured out how to hide it. It was a clever idea. In those days I carried a little satchel, and I arranged for the rabbit to be in a container that would be secretly pulled through a trapdoor in the lid of the satchel. And it would just have to stay in there for, a half hour or so. And we all know that rabbits love to sleep.
So it's a silent act. What's going to wake the rabbit up?
Yeah, well, certainly not laughter or applause. So the night before,
how big an audience?
Audience of 50.
50, and where?
In the basement of a dormitory at Amherst College that had been made into a little studio theater.
And who are these 50 people?
These are excited fans. I have no recollection.
I mean, were they
students?
Faculty or
faculty and students? Mm-hmm. Faculty and students. So the container worked for the rabbit. The switch worked for switching in the rabbit for the fabric.
That's pretty good.
So I thought everything was fine. So I didn't think it was necessary.
But what about the fire?
Didn't think it was necessary to bring in The fire I could tamp out with my hands,
Okay.
and the switch was all the switch part was all fine, but I didn't think it was necessary to bring in the rabbit until the final dress rehearsal. I brought the rabbit in for the final dress rehearsal, and this was not a docile rabbit. This was a rabbit which, when you put it in its little container, was like Houdini, except noisier. And banged, thrashed, whimpered, screamed. And so my bag, picture in your mind, if you will, a bag as in a cartoon, sort of going, yipes, 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 and jumping up and down. And I thought that was probably not helpful to the trick, since that would be going on for the entire duration of the rest of the show, of which this trick was to be the climax.
What are the tricks from the show?
Version of the razor blades.
Which is going to be your needles.
Eventually to the needles.
Which is swallowing the razor blades and bringing them up on a piece of thread.
Mm-hmm. But in those days, not simply presented, of course, presented in character, as a small child discovering his father's razor blades and eating them. I don't remember anything else in that show. Maybe it might be some early version of the Dancing Handkerchief.
Oh.
Which, has haunted us for many years. So, having discovered that the rabbit was not going to remain quiet, I contacted my friend, a dorm friend who just down the hall, who was a veterinary student, whose name was Joel.
Don't give his name.
Joel something.
Don't give his name. He'd go to prison.
Okay. His name was Billy. We'll call him Billy.
Joel.
Billy Joel. Billy Joel lived down the hall before he discovered his true talents. And I said, is there any way that we could sedate this rabbit? And he said, yeah, I think I could get something. And so, night of the show...
Black market rabbit drugs.
Night of the show, I went to his room, and he sedated the rabbit by injecting its left hind leg with some sort of sedative, and lo and behold, the rabbit did calm down. Didn't die, just calmed down. Was breathing a little more slowly, smiling. And he went smiling into his little container, and we then came to the part of the show where the rabbit was to be produced. We did the switch. Lo and behold, there is a living rabbit. And it's breathing, but I think that just to show the audience that it's really, truly alive, I should set it down on the floor and let it hop a little bit. Whereupon it hopped with 3 legs. The fourth leg dragged behind it, either numb or permanently disabled. I no longer know, but it dragged behind it, and
That's the creepy ending you were looking for.
It is a remarkably creepy ending. Proving that even a god capable of creating life might have imperfections. But it is one of the places that reinforced the idea of rehearsing in advance of the final dress.
Well, every time we have Matt King on, I love to hear stories of screwed up performances. And most of the screwed up performances of your life, I've been not only part of, but sometimes the cause of. Yes. Maybe often the cause of. But you also had, I would love to hear you do a little bit of your you started magic at 5.
Yes.
Yeah. And do you remember the patter for your Mandarin Chinese?
Hey, let's use that as a tease and do an ad. What do you say?
Let's do an ad. That's a tease. We're going to hear a little bit of Teller's 12-year-old. Is that what it is? About 12?
Probably 11 or 12.
11 or 12-year-old magic act. After I talk about this, describe. You remember your first magic show you did in public?
I believe the first magic shows that I ever did in public were, if you call this public, were in backyard carnivals at my house. And I was drawn to exotic Eastern wear. And in emulation of people like Chung Ling Soo, the person who was shot to death with the bullet catch.
What was Chung Ling Soo's real name?
Billy Robinson. He was a Scottish-American from New York City. Went during the great period in the U.S. where Orientalism was all the fancy, became Chinese. Well, I became Chinese at the age of 12. I became a character. Now, if there's any Chinese-speaking people listening on this show, understand that I learned to pronounce this by reading books about how to pronounce Chinese. But I looked up the Chinese word for magician, and it was something like Huan Xiu Jia. That's my attempt to do the pitch stuff, and it's probably just awful.
Do it again.
Huan Xiu Jia.
And I exactly the same.
And I learned to paint the Chinese letters that mean magician, and I introduced myself as. Now, of course, I dressed for my birthday one year. My parents found me an orange velvet robe, which became part of our until it was stolen in New York. Became part of the Asparagus Valley Cultural Society's costume division, and I wore a long Chinese mustache and a little hat. Little beanie with a little pom-pom on top and a pigtail hanging out the back, and a long Chinese, I said a long Chinese mustache and a little goatee. And I had a Chinese gong.
Did you make up your round eyes at all?
Of course. What kind of person do you think I am? I'd put on a beanie and not make up my little round eyes?
Well, I thought maybe you took as much care of that as you did in creating life.
Oh, no, much more care.
Much more care.
Yeah, because that had to do with mere appearances. And I had a Chinese gong, and my father made a beautiful. My father was a pretty good craftsman and a very good artist. And he made a beautiful black wooden Chinese gong stand with a dragon on it, stenciled on it in gold in a stencil that he had made himself. And my opening patter was, 2,000 years ago, I lived in ancient China. One day, while walking through the beautiful gardens of my house, I discovered something which had never been there before, a small stone statue of a dragon, which was holding this brass Chinese gong. Inscribed on the stone beneath were the words, "He who strikes the gong of the sacred dragon will be able to perform magic." And so I did, and so I passed through time to where you live today to show you some ancient pieces of Oriental magic.
And this is when you would be doing this act.
Yes.
What was the audience?
The audience was, well, it varied, but they were all screaming children. They were all small screaming children sitting on a floor. Although most memorably, there was an audience of Cub Scouts once, who were not content with sitting on the floor.
Not your. Were you in the Cub Scouts? Was it your troop or?
I don't believe I was.
So they could have believed you actually were from ancient China.
They didn't.
They thought you were from Philly?
They thought I was from Philly. Yeah, they did. And they emphasized that by taking the hard candy that they had in their possession and pelting me with it literally.
Something we recreated, actually, on Bullshit one episode. Recreated that memory for you. The fond memories of childhood relived it during our own show.
They pelted you. Did it slow you down?
Yes.
It did?
Yes, it was heartbreaking. And I was also in my the poverty of my rehearsal, I was also fumbling for props at the same time that they were pelting me with hard candy. And so tricks were being exposed, and it was a really unpleasant experience. I went home, and my mother was terribly upset. And I was sort of like, well, that was miserable, but, I'll move on with it. And she was more upset than I was.
Well, I can understand that.
Yeah.
Sure.
As a parent, you can understand.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Seeing your child coming back from ancient China, which is a big deal, to be pelted by candy by Philadelphia Cub Scouts.
Yes, and mocked.
And mocked.
Mocked liberally for his velvet attire.
And in a certain sense, maybe still being mocked now by grown-ups looking back.
Undoubtedly. But that had a certain hardening effect that I think is very helpful to a person in show business.
Yeah, you gotta.
You gotta get those horrible shows out of the way where just the worst thing possible happens, and you find that you can live through it.
Yeah, Matt King vomiting while doing a magic trick on stage.
Sure.
Yeah, getting through it. And we were later in what was it, Da Vinci? What was her name?
Muriel de Givenchy.
Yeah.
A local Philadelphia fashion designer who had coincidentally happened to have the name of a famous fashion designer. And we were engaged to entertain while fashion models paraded around on stage in the middle of the Benjamin Franklin Parkway in July, which is the perfect setup for a race riot, which is indeed, I think, what was going on around us. So we were prancing around the stage with you juggling, and we're trying to play music.
And you eating needles.
Me eating needles and pulling coins off models, done in the round on a stage, an 8-foot square stage, elevated with chaos and screaming on all sides.
Chaos and danger.
Danger.
Danger. I mean, there's no doubt there was danger. I remember that parkway just being a nightmare.
It was horrifying.
We couldn't get there or back, and there was nothing entertaining about what we were doing, and everybody knew it.
The other show that calls to mind is the show that we did behind the Philadelphia Art Museum.
For nobody.
For nobody.
Yes. Yeah, during Philadelphia 76, right. Which was the big bicentennial celebration. And Philadelphia thought it was going to get millions of people coming in to do this. And they engaged entertainers to work in various places around the city that weren't good places to perform. And we were getting like $100 a show or something.
We were.
Was it 100?
Yeah.
It was a lot, I remember.
It was a fortune.
And we to do 3 or 4 shows a day. And the rule on it was we could cancel shows because of rain or no one showing up. But if we didn't do the show, we didn't get paid.
Right.
That was the rule. So it became this purely existential thing. I remember it was behind the art museum, you said?
Yes, the show I'm thinking of, it was, they placed the stage behind the Philadelphia Art Museum in a place where there is no street traffic. There's no way to find out that this stage is there.
And just kind of a hill, right? It was kind of a grassy hill.
It was the rear steps of the art museum.
Okay,
it was a Greek temple with some rear steps, and at the base of that, a platform stage. And it began to rain, and there was I think there may have been 2 people who, when it started to rain, left.
Yeah, there was a time for most of the show when there was no one watching us. I mean, absolutely no one watching us, and it was pouring rain. We're out there in our costumes, and we used to do this thing where we had a xylophone with Weir, and we would bang on just the black keys.
Now, if you bang on every other black key on a piano or a xylophone, it sounds kind of oriental.
Yeah, sure.
In a cartoon kung fu type way. And we would do that as a joke, and we didn't want to get our other props wet, and there was nobody there. And we were contracted. Do you remember how long the shows were? 20 minutes?
It was 20 minutes.
A 20-minute show for $100. So we went out, the 3 of us, with mallets and banged on the black keys of the xylophone for
20 minutes.
With nobody there. I mean, nobody checking on us or anything. Just in our own little in our weird little morality. If we actually did the show, we would get paid, and we did get paid.
We were so lucky to get paid.
Paid caught you. Oh.
Well, we were. I mean, that summer of Philadelphia 76, that was our income.
Yeah.
That was everything we were going to make.
Right.
And we had to do every one of those shows. It was budgeted to get through. So for 20 minutes. It's kind of like Spinal Tap's Jazz Odyssey. It was the exact same kind of thing. So now, this is not the right segue to do, because I guess I should wait till we get into some not going to the worst shows possible. But following up on Macbeth, you're now going to do The Tempest.
Next year, I'm going to do The Tempest. And The Tempest is it's almost Samuel Beckett level of weird. For Shakespeare, it's got a story that has no suspense. It's got scenes in it that are completely fantastical and really hard to understand. And it's got some great poetry and some wonderful characters. And it is normally a trial for an audience to watch because there is so much that you can do so badly in it. But it's about a magician. And it's about a magician giving up magic. Or at least that's the way I see it. And so I thought that it would be interesting to stage it as a magic show about a magician giving up magic, and to stage all the weird little Samuel Beckett-y scenes in it as small magic shows. The real drama of it is that Prospero, who's the star of the show, years ago became obsessed with magic and stopped paying attention to the real world, and that got him in big trouble. His brother took over. Prospero was the Duke of Milan, and his brother took over Milan, put Prospero and his little daughter Miranda into a horrible little rowboat, dropped them off at sea, expecting them to die of exposure. But instead they came to an island, and on the island Prospero used the magic that he had learned in all of his secret studies. And what this magic is it's another one of those strange Shakespearean ambiguities, because there are elements of it that sound exactly like magic show, like our magic show, and there are elements that sound like alchemy and that sound like other kinds of, more spooky magic and more philosophical magic. But Prospero uses whatever this magic is to get control of the spirits that inhabit the island. And he's there living, in moderate comfort with his daughter and their pet monster Caliban, and his right-hand man, who's an air spirit called Ariel. They live there for 12 years, and they think they're going to be there the rest of their lives. And then it so happens, by a coincidence that precipitates the action of the show, that his brother and a lot of the people who were involved in the plot that got him cast out of Milan happened to be passing nearby on a ship. And Prospero recognizes this and creates an illusory storm, a storm that isn't really happening, but to everybody on that ship, they think it's happening. They see people being thrown off the ship and drowning. A king who's on there sees his own son go under the waves for the last time. They see lightning strike the ship. They see the ship all burning up, but none of it is happening. Prospero's making it all happen by means of his spirits. And again, it's interesting how careful Shakespeare is to not let us know for sure whether he's like hypnotizing all of these people, or whether there are real spirits that are really doing things, or what is going on. But it seemed to me that the idea of using the illusion of a storm, and all of the subsequent events in the show that are illusions, of using magic tricks to represent that, was really, really good. Throughout, once the storm is over, all of his old enemies are separated and cast around the island. And he puts on little horrifying shows for each of them to make them feel guilty, make them feel contrite for what they did years ago, and essentially uses magic to torture them, much the way we do with our audience. But uses these magic shows to torture them, and then brings them all together at the end of the show and says, well, now that I've tortured you, I forgive you all. I'm going to give up magic because I think it's more important to raise my child properly, and I'm going to go back and become the Duke of Milan again. And as I was thinking about this, I was reading about a 1940s touring show called Harry Willard. Harry Willard was a magician who was famous during the Depression. He would go from town to town with a tractor trailer and a tent. And he'd use the bed of the tractor trailer as his stage, and he'd set up the tent, and there were auxiliary vehicles, trailers, and things that his troupe lived in. And they would do magic shows. And the people who saw these magic shows uniformly report them as being the greatest magic shows ever. Now, I've seen Harry Willard's props, and they're crap. In fact, just a couple of nights ago, I saw Harry Willard's magic wand at my friend Mike Caveney's house in Pasadena. And Harry Willard's magic wand is a dowel stick that looks like it was probably taken from the back of a chair. And on the end, for the caps that are usually like ivory caps, he has the casings of bullets on the ends, just because that would provide a little bit of brass for the end of it. The props were crap, and yet these people who saw this show really uniformly report being transported to fairyland by it.
Now, would these have been people that had seen other magic shows?
I don't know. I kind of doubt it, by and large. I think, by and large...
But it still was good enough that...
It was good enough that they were absolutely convinced that they were seeing great, great magic. And there's a lot of information about how Harry Willard did his tricks. And the methods on the tricks are very good. They're very deceptive. So he's got this sort of low-tech props, but a good mind, a great voice.
Give an example of one of the tricks.
Well, he did, in a tent, he levitated his daughter at the very footlights of the stage. And a full-scale levitation done at the footlights of the stage. He did a trick where he took a very simple sort of chest. To prove there are no trapdoors, he lined the walls of the chest with panes of glass. The chest was elevated above the stage on feet, so you could really genuinely see below it. And then he would just take a silk handkerchief and pass it quickly in front of the chest, and it would be suddenly, instantly full of a live woman who would pop out. I mean, that's a very, very good trick to be doing in a tent. And I liked the rawness of that, but I also thought being in a show like that, where you travel from town to town, and, Monday and Tuesday you do one show. Monday and Tuesday you do one show. Wednesday and Thursday you do another show. Friday and Saturday you do a third show. So you have, 5 hours of material that you're doing.
For the same audience.
For the same audience. People come back.
So it's like a cruise ship.
Yeah. And then on Sunday, you get in the car and you drive to the next town. I thought living on this must be a lot like living on an island. And I thought, I thought more. One of the things that Harry Willard had in his show was his own daughter, who was a teenager at the time, much like Prospero's daughter there. And I began to think, what if he decided, towards the end of his life, that he had always really belonged in the theater? And what if he had always had an ambition to do Shakespeare? And of course, the natural play for him to do would be The Tempest, because that's the play about the magician. How would he stage that play? Well, he'd use his own magic repertoire to do it. And so these two ideas began to come together. The idea that of taking Prospero the magician as a real magician, taking him seriously. Normally, in most productions of The Tempest, because this is Shakespeare's last solo play, the last play that he wrote by himself, people tend to think of it as autobiographical. When Prospero talks about giving up magic, your scholars sit around and go, oh, well, that's really Shakespeare metaphorically talking about giving up playwriting. Fine, let the scholars say that. But he's talking about giving up magic. I thought somebody should take that seriously about a magician giving up magic. And I began to think about the period and the flavor of that. And there's lots of music in the show, because it was staged originally as a show with lots of music and costumes and effects for a king. And I had been listening to a lot of Tom Waits at the time.
It was staged. The original Shakespeare was staged for a king.
Yeah, it was. I mean,
not within the show, but outside the real show.
The Shakespeare show was staged as a mask, which is a sort of a fluffy entertainment that would be done for a king. That was less like a play and more like a variety show, but with a theme winding through it. And I began to think about the music of that, and I thought about that period. That period where people are at the end of their rope, and I'd been listening to a lot of Tom Waits at the time, and it occurred to me that Tom Waits's sound has that sort of disconnected, lost, worn.
The newest Tom Waits stuff, the newest record.
This is I'm thinking Tom Waits through his whole career has going for him that sort of road-worn quality.
Yeah, but it starts out with piano and ends up with oil drums.
Yes. Yeah. And I sent a biography of Willard with a lot of pictures of it to Tom. And he opened it up, and he happened to open it up to a page that showed Willard's band, because Willard would have a band do a turn now and then on stage. And it was undoubtedly the band was also the guys who put up the tent, with a female singer. And the female singer is standing there in 1930s short sort of skirt with a megaphone, singing at the audience. Tom took a look at that picture and he said, "Yeah, I think this is right." And so that Tom said, "You can use anything in my catalog from Island on." As
an island
songs.
ties in with the Prospero.
It does.
Lucky record label is.
Yeah, and so that's where we are right now. Prospero's right-hand man, I think of as a runaway teenager who always wanted to be a magician, We see these kids all the time. We see magic kids who are 15, 16, virtuoso with sleight of hand, have not a social skill in the world. And Ariel is a character who doesn't understand human beings. Ariel is a non-feeling person. He has no connection with human beings. He looks at people and he says, they must be feeling this way, but I can't understand that. Just like those kids. And so I thought that would be an interesting character. That would be an interesting way to play that. We don't have the person playing Prospero yet. We're doing a workshop on it in January to work with actors, and we're probably going to keep the singing to a singer and a band so that the Shakespearean actors don't also have to sing.
And how much are you changing the script? Are you going to do the Shakespeare script?
Yes, sir.
You are?
Yes. Here's what has to be done with Shakespeare, I believe. I believe that you have to take words that are completely meaningless to modern audiences and find occasional substitute words that will connect, that will mean the same thing, but that are the same number of syllables. Because you want to keep the way the Shakespeare language flows, because you can't beat how beautiful the language is. But sometimes you have to just substitute a word that means, for example, siege means shit in Shakespeare. You want to say turd or shit or something like that in the modern thing, so the audience doesn't go, what the hell's going on? Also, comic scenes in Shakespeare very often don't play at all. They very often don't play because, as you know, comedy's got to bring you to yourself. It has to feel present tense, or it doesn't really do its job. So some of the comedy scenes are going, as we did with Macbeth, when we had a comic scene there, we had an actor take the themes of the scene and many of the words and improvise around it so the audience could understand it and get some laughs.
And you're going to workshop this in January here in Vegas?
Yeah, workshopping it in Vegas and then doing the first production of it, so almost a sort of preview run of it, in a tent outside the Smith Center here in Vegas. Then it'll move to ART in Boston in the spring, and ART is the American Repertory Theater in Boston, in Cambridge. And then it'll move to the Folger in Washington, D.C., and then we have one more theater that we're considering taking.
But always in a tent?
Always in a tent, same tent. Taking advantage of the fact that one of the things that Mr. Willard had to work with in his tent was he was always working on his truck bed, meaning he could put trapdoors in his truck bed. Yeah. A luxury that touring magicians don't have when they go to theaters.
So you'll have a truck bed in there?
Yeah.
It'll be how close will it be to Willard's setup?
I don't know yet. I don't. We have to address all the practicalities of a tent, which I'm learning only the rudiments of tent stuff.
No, Robbie knows all about tents.
Robbie does, and we have some other people who are pretty good on this stuff.
And how many people are you supposed to seat there?
500.
500 people in a tent.
Yep.
And Tom's going to be at the workshops.
Some of them.
And is he writing anything new for it? Is it going to be just tough?
At this point, no. We'll see how he feels about it as the production proceeds, because maybe he'll see something that will tickle him.
And how big a band?
Is yet undetermined. I'm guessing 3 or 4, and mobile. They need to be movable. They need to move from place to place.
On the stage.
On the stage. Sometimes show up in the house. Sometimes show up above. Sometimes show up on one side, and sometimes single instruments here and there.
So accordion.
Well, yeah.
Accordion moves. Tom Waits loves accordion.
Accordion moves.
Over and over again, he loves accordion. Every chance he can get.
And I'll do my best to get. When we did Macbeth, as you and I share this, which is when we go to the live theater, we don't like to hear recordings. We like to hear live music. So we have Jonesy in our live show, and you play in our live show. And when there's music, it's made by people. When we did Macbeth, lots of people argued in favor of creating a soundtrack that would be recorded, and I said no. And I found Kenny Wollison, who is one of Tom Waits' favorite percussionists, known probably best from Sex Mob, who created a live percussion score for that show that was just bone-chilling. It was just bone-chilling. And, the stage was all wrought ironwork, and the percussionist was lurking underneath, like some kind of little hunchback demon, whacking on the set and whacking on things like a piano soundboard and weird instruments that Kenny, who is this wonderful spidery guy, made himself.
We're going to take another break to do another commercial thing. And we're going to come back and wrap it up with television. So people will be able to see your version of The Tempest in Vegas, D.C., Vegas, Boston, and D.C. in that order, and maybe other places as well.
And maybe in California we have one.
And weren't you also talking to Palabolas?
Yeah, well, Palabolas, whom we're going to...
Am I saying it wrong?
Palabolas, whom we're going to have a little work with
later. Yeah, Penn and Teller do anything with Palabolas.
Later this year. We thought it would be cool to see whether Palabolas could... The monster, there's a monster...
We should also say Palabolas is a dance troupe of originally non-dancers who put together the greatest dance shows ever, kind of the Blue Man Group of dance, and just
very
fabulous.
Hugely athletic.
Sexy, and naked,
strange,
sexy. Yeah.
Just bold, wacky stuff. And there's a monster in The Tempest called Caliban, and my co-director and I, Aaron Posner, thought it would be a very interesting idea to go and hang out with Palabolas and see what happens if you have several dancers who might be able to be made into one monster.
Yeah, they do a lot of that stuff.
And we got a pretty beautiful idea for how to do that.
And will they use Palabolas people, or will they train people to do Palabolas?
No. We'll use Palabolas people.
3 of them?
2.
2 Palabolas people doing Caliban?
Yep.
And are they going to be talking? They have lines?
They have lines.
Oh, that'll be great. That'll be really great.
There's a lot of work for my co-director Aaron Posner to do in this, because he's going to be dealing with some people who are not Shakespearean actors and who have complicated Shakespearean lines to learn and to understand and to deliver. So he'll be working hard.
And this is all done in all the workshops are done in January.
We're doing one 7-day workshop in January, and then there will be another later in the year, and then we'll go into rehearsals in the spring of 2013.
Right. Okay. So soon.
It's soon.
Very soon.
It's soon. Yeah.
All over a year from now.
Yeah.
All up and.
Let me know if you want to sell that truck in town when you're done.
I'll put you in touch with the people who will own it.
So, and what did you do in The Exorcist?
Well, The Exorcist, not a show that naturally you think of as a theater show. You think of The Exorcist as a movie with a lot of special effects in it and a lot of really loud noises. And so when John Peelmeyer worked out a script with The Exorcist, the producer of The Exorcist had seen the show that Todd Robinson and I did in New York called Play Dead, and he was truly scared by it and thought that he should contact me as somebody who knows how to scare people in the theater. And he got me on, and he got on John Doyle, the fellow who did that fabulous Sweeney Todd that you liked so much.
I love that.
In New York. And John Doyle's a wonderful, wonderful director. And John Doyle conceived a version of The Exorcist that would all seem to be being staged in a church. It was very church-like. There was a big altar table in the middle and that sort of weird grill work like you see in Catholic churches. And a pretty good idea because churches are creepy. And we want The Exorcist to be creepy. And we initially talked about lots of special effects for it, but as we talked more and more, he wanted to do the show scaring the audience with the ideas and not scaring them with effects. So we boiled it all down to doing just one levitation in that show, and it was difficult to do because the set was totally stripped down, and it was to be done off the altar table, which was moved all over the stage throughout the show. And there was too much light to use any kind of wires, and little Regan couldn't run off stage because no actor left the stage, couldn't run off stage and put on a harness. So I had to devise a levitation for that. And I did, and I think it was very effective. I think it was very, very powerful and very beautiful and surprisingly sexy. The young woman doing it was in her early 20s, but looked like a very young girl. But somehow when you get that, she's in her nightgown and her legs are suddenly sticking out and clawing at the air. It was very sexy and good.
Yeah, well, that the woman who played Regan in the Regan, is it Regan or Regan?
I don't remember. Say Regan.
Regan played Regan, was the daughter of a guy I went to high school with. It's a Greenfield, Massachusetts girl, and all of a sudden I get emails occasionally from, he lives in Vietnam or something for some nutty reason, and I would get emails saying that, my daughter is working in this play that everybody should see in L.A., a version of The Exorcist. And meanwhile, when I was in exile on Celebrity Apprentice, Teller was talking about working on a version of The Exorcist in L.A., and I was going, gee, what are the chances that there's 2 productions of The Exorcist going on in L.A.? I heard, I didn't get out to see The Exorcist. I was hoping it would do more shows and I'd be able to see it, because people said, I talked to Phil Proctor and a few other people who saw that levitation and just said the levitation looked great.
It was nice.
Yeah.
It was really,
it
was beautiful. Also beautiful in a church setting, because you're really used to seeing resurrections in church setting. You're in a church setting, you expect a resurrection.
Sure, that's the least you can get from a church setting.
If they did reresurrections like that more often in church settings, they might do
We'd
better.
be there.
Yeah.
They'd have us
consulting at very least.
At very least, we'd consult on the resurrections in the church. So 2013 for your outside of Penn and Teller projects is going to be the Tempest.
Yeah.
Which seems wicked ambitious and good.
Thank you.
Seems like that'll be a great thing with a Depression era truck and a tent and Tom Waits and Palabolas, which I have to learn to say their names if we're going to work with them next year. Palabolas. I don't know why I do that, the wrong A in there. Palabolas.
But weird foreign words are not your strong suit.
No, words are not my...
Try Huan Shou Chia.
Huan Shou Chia.
Good.
Yeah. Try again.
Chia pet.
Say it again.
Huan Shou Chia.
You really do try the
I try it.
When we were in China, did you try saying that to anybody? Why didn't you?
I think I did, and they didn't have a clue what I was saying.
Well, that's the proper thing. Want to thank Teller of Penn and Teller for being the guest here.
Well, there's no proof that it was really me, right?
No, there's no evidence whatsoever. Dustin Knaus, who's I don't even think here, but I'm thanking him anyways.
Here.
Jarrett, Dustin's still here?
I thought so.
Reddy Rich, he's gone. Reddy Rich, want to thank, of course, Peter Golden, Spicoli, and Glenn Allen. I haven't mentioned everybody now. Our boss, kind of, sort of, Adam Carolla. My name is Penn Jillette. That was Penn Sunday School. Doing that.
Yeah. I think they were doing both. I think they were taking their choice. From my point of view, what I was trying to do was to take them completely inside Macbeth's experience. I was really trying to show the experience from his point of view.
The entire play.
Yeah.
So you never change points of view. The entire play is from inside Macbeth's.
There are scenes in which Macbeth does not appear, and in those scenes you're not from his point of view. But the story essentially is being told. I see the story as being told from his point of view.
But the scenes that he's not in are not things he could know?
Not really, because sometimes it's like people attacking his castle, and he doesn't know about that.
Sure. Now, why don't you detail the magic tricks you put into that for people who didn't see it?
Well, the very first idea that I got on it that I really liked was there's a lot of talk about people faking their expressions for other people. That is, they're putting on a false face, greeting people whom they're about to murder cheerfully. So I thought it would be cool to have a mirror on stage so that every time they're putting on their false face, they could look into that mirror. That also set up the presence of a mirror in Mr. and Mrs. Macbeth's bedroom. And so the very first image that I had was of Macbeth having put on his false face for other occasions, kind of leaning against that mirror, and then suddenly seeing the reflection of a dagger floating in that mirror. And what's neat to me about that is that the reflection, from the audience's point of view, the reflection was there, but the substance wasn't. But when Macbeth himself lifted his hand as if to grasp the reflection, you saw his hand grasping empty air in the theater, but you saw the reflection of his hand grasping the dagger. And it's really interesting, because then what you see is that image of a translucent object that your hand is reaching through and trying to grab hold of. And we had it puppeteered in such a way. It was of course, it was a Pepper's Ghost kind of illusion. So that means that what's going on is really happening behind the surface of the mirror, and the mirror is not by John Henry Pepper, who worked at he was a teacher at the London Polytechnic that had a little theater. He built a little theater there where this whole thing was set up so that people could act out stupid little plays. I mean, really stupid, content-free little plays.
To show off the ghost,
that showed off the effect.
You have to build the theater for this.
You have to build a theater for this. The greatest place to see this nowadays is at Knott's Berry Farm. What's it called? Like the Haunted Wigwam or it's
the Knott's? No, I don't know that.
Yeah,
Henry Dirks is the guy who invented it.
Dirks, that's it. Yeah, it begins with a P, as I said.
Yeah.
But that's really great there. And in the Disney Haunted Mansion, there's a place where your little ghost car is riding along, and you look down into a great big ballroom. And in the ballroom, you see transparent ghosts, waltzing around tables. And what you're looking at is you're looking through a sheet of glass to see the furniture of the room, but reflected on that sheet of glass is a scene that's happening underneath you, which is ghosts on little turntables being spun. It's also beautifully done in Finding Nemo in Florida, in the Disney in Florida.
Yeah, they have it in California as well.
Yeah, where you're actually looking into a real aquarium, and in there you see an animated fish that's actually just being reflected off the glass of the fish tank.
And also, now this is often called in modern days a hologram. It's not that. It's misrepresented. It's hyped that way when it really isn't. Yep. And I believe, do you know exactly how the Tupac Shakur live performance was done?
No, I don't.
In that show? Because I think that was also that same thing. They said not a hologram, but something kind of like a hologram. The people that were hyping it referred to it differently.
Nowadays because we have really good video screens, we don't have to have dummies illuminated to play our ghosts. We can have video screens with really amazing effects on them that can apparently be placed into a scene by being reflected at the appropriate distance from the piece of glass that you're looking through.
From my point of view, more than the text, thought that everything in it was hallucination. But do you think that Shakespeare's purposely straddling the fence on that?
I think one of the reasons that he stands up to contemporary viewings is because you don't necessarily have to interpret all the supernatural stuff as really occurring. So you can go both ways. He's pretty careful about it. I mean, in Hamlet, he's very, very careful about not saying where Hamlet's father's spirit is residing, whether he's in hell or whether he's just in Hamlet's mind, or whether he's just one of those sort of wandering non-Christian ghosts, from that you see from ancient times. He's very careful. He's weirdly careful to deal with the supernatural in an ambiguous way that can be psychological. I think that is what he's doing. So when you usually see the show, you usually see some parts interpreted as hallucinations. You see Lady Macbeth rubbing her hands as though she's got blood on them, but you don't see the blood. Right. On the other hand, in the Banquo ghost scene, you actually do see Banquo, and that's and that's the way it's in the play. It's specified that Banquo comes on stage as a ghost and scares Macbeth, but to the audience, I think you're left to go one way or the other.
And when you put special effects in there, when you put magic tricks in there, have you moved it away from hallucination and from psychological, or you just feel like the audience is... I understand that in a movie, that you could change the point of view, but in the theater, did you feel that people watching the show were switching their point of view to inside Macbeth's mind, or did you feel they were seeing something from the outside? How does that... Because in movies, we know the convention for... We are interviewing Teller, the silent half of Penn and Teller.
Fuck you, silent. What the fuck are you talking about?
Silent. Fuck you, first words out of his mouth. I don't think we're going to deal with any of the why you're silent or how we got together, any of that stuff.
You know that, don't you?
I know all of that. Let's talk about Shakespeare.
Oh, good.
Let's start with Shakespeare. Talk about your the production of Macbeth that you did, and then we'll go to the production of Tempest.
Oh, Macbeth. Well, yeah. Macbeth is a supernatural horror thriller that was written in the 1500s, and it's full of ghosts and supernatural visions and hallucinations and stuff. And I thought that would be a good show to fill up with some magic, because a lot of it has to do with people going crazy and seeing things that aren't really there. And magic is all about making people see things that are not there. And that's what we did. We shared that position with the audience. So instead of just looking at somebody standing on stage, gazing off into the air, waving his hand and saying, "Is this a dagger which I see before me?" The audience got to see what Macbeth was seeing. So we took him inside the characters.
But you said that it was ghosts and apparitions and hallucinations. Do you believe in the story of Macbeth that some of those ghosts are supposed to be in the world?
Shakespeare's really good at straddling the fence on that. He gives you the impression. I mean, for example, the ghost of Banquo. Macbeth murders a guy. He murders his very good friend Banquo because there's been a prediction that Banquo will someday take over, and Macbeth gets really scared on that because he's quite a paranoid guy. And when Banquo appears on stage, there really is a question. Is Macbeth just seeing this in his own mind, or is the ghost of Banquo really coming back? And Shakespeare really doesn't ever deal with that.
Yeah, when I read it, which you're an expert on this, and I read it once. I read it, and I think this is probably...
Mirrors like the kind of mirror you have in interrogation rooms. It's a sort of a one-way mirror that if you if the detectives in the interrogation room had a really bright spotlight on them and the lights in the interrogation room went down, you'd see this ghostly image of detectives listening in to the interrogation room. Well, we put the mirror, the dagger, in that same sort of position, just behind the mirror with an extremely bright light on it, so you could see both what was going on stage and this ghostly image behind it.
You should explain how Pepper's Ghost works in the Haunted Mansion. The Haunted Mansion.
Sure. One of the Pepper's Ghost is Pepper's Ghost proper is a slightly different effect, but I'll trace it back. In the old days, if you're in a house late at night, and there's no lights on in your room, and you walk to the window holding a candle, you'll see your own reflection combined with whatever you can see on the street outside you. Let's say the street light is shining down on your lawn. You'll see a combination in which your reflection, translucent, seems to be in that scene of the lawn outside the window. An English guy, an English scientist whose name escapes me right now, begins with a P, but it wasn't Pepper. An English scientist came up with a way of doing that in the theater, and what he did was it's a crazy sort of idea. But imagine an audience seated in an arena-style seating, where the seats go up, and they're looking down at the stage. And when they look down at the stage, they see between them and the stage is a sheet of glass. They can look through the sheet of glass and see what's really going on the stage, but if you put underneath the audience, in a little nook underneath the audience, brightly illuminated people dressed as ghosts, those people are reflected on the sheet of glass that the audience is looking through, and they seem to be in the scene on stage. That illusion was made famous